The intelligence of complexity, l'intelligence de la complexité, is an epistemological paradigm developed by Edgar Morin relating to the strategy of reliance, connection. Morin explains, "When I speak of complexity, I am referring to the elementary Latin meaning of the word complexus, that which is woven together. The components are different, but you have to see, as in a tapestry, the figure of totality." The real problem of thought reform is that we have learned to separate too well. It is better to learn how to link, to connect, that is to say, not only to establish a connection end to end, but to establish a connection which is made in a loop. Besides, in the French word relier, to connect, there is a re. It is the return of the loop on itself. The loop is self-producing. At the origin of life, a kind of loop was created. The word itself has self-produced in a mysterious way. Knowledge today must have instruments, fundamental concepts that will allow connection. Edgar Morin's reliance strategy aims to interlace knowledge and know-how from various fields, to link the humanities and the arts to the sciences in the most diverse configurations. This strategy is significant for the discipline of architecture in general. However, what strikes us as particularly evocative is Morin's suggestion of an affinity between reliance and continual renewal, such as characterizes life itself. How can the intelligence of complexity be developed in architecture? Is it possible to think of architecture as natural machinery and thus bring it closer to the mystery of self-production? Can we conceive of it not as a material construction and an object, as durable, useful, and graceful as it may be, but to see it rather as a heterogeneous apparatus that perpetually hosts life, produces social connections, and a stimulating environment, aesthetic and emotional experience? And what tools can help us explore these questions and develop the underlying objectives? For many years, I have been working at Media Lab AU, a research and creation laboratory at Université de Montréal, on questions related to the conceptual and instrumental tools of architecture, and exploring these tools beyond architectural conventions and traditions. We explore cinematographic, videographic, and digital multimedia approaches while situating the architectural project in the city as close as possible to contemporary issues. Using three methods developed in the laboratory: moving collage, interactive landscape, and video construction, we are attempting to enrich the cultural design and disciplinary field. These three types of figuration are developed in projects, each of which engage a theme, a place, and a question. They then become works in themselves and lead an independent existence in art galleries where they reach a larger audience. I brought the methods developed in the laboratory into my teaching relatively rapidly, most recently, to give just one example, within the framework of the thematic stream named Interstice and Mediation, Architecture, City, and Media Arts, offered as part of the Master of Architecture professional program for the last 3 years. The teaching offered by our team focuses on an in-depth knowledge of an urban environment, on the development of innovative and sensitive design instruments, and on the acquisition of a fine understanding of existing urban substance. Fringes and edges, these marginal lands, are our favorite sites. The student project takes on the creation of public facilities and public spaces. In the 1-year cycle, the students take a seminar course on the relationship between architecture, cinema, and contemporary art, a research studio, as well as a thesis project. The proposed method includes theoretical thematic studies, cartographies, dynamic and conceptual, deep mapping, and conduct analysis and interpretations through photographic and filmic, videographic means, focusing on the visual and auditory aspect of the environment and on perception and motion. The conceptual process of the thesis project includes videos, drawings of various types, 3D models, and a short research paper. The important product resulting from this process is a video, image and sound, often mixed with animations of digital 3D models and possibly found footage, which creates the synthetic environment proposed by the project. This video document presents the site and its landscape, its new structures, the events, the life that happens there. It seeks to express not only the end result, but also the ideas and the intentions of the design, its individual and collective imagination. The interests and concerns of our research and creations revolve around several themes. I propose to highlight them. For architecture, ecology, in the environmental, social, and mental sense, means above all working with a place that is already there, sizing its energy. The strategy implies using what is available and free. For an urban project, it is urban space, widely understood, that is available. We give equal importance to the site and to the architectural work. For us, the site is an integral part of the project and not, as traditionally understood, the background for the work. The site is the foremost part of the work, its raison d'être, and its most important resource. This principle, as advanced and developed by the land art movement in the second half of the 20th century, addressed itself to space that was vast and empty. Land art takes over a grandiose, non-humanized site and transfers it to the world of art, often maintaining a certain ambiguity between the two. The new art site object merges into the natural site, in a way disguises itself as the natural site. We, however, work within urban density. The object of our work is always artificial. Generally, it is a banal landscape. Through the remediation of the design project, this landscape becomes an aesthetic object, an artwork. We see the territory as an active matrix capable of stimulating programs, constructions, and social practices, the antithesis of a passive soil that only perceives pre-programmed object. The research carried out in our studios consists of exploring the territory and the multiple dimension of urban spaces, including the fourth dimension, time. Thus, the program of the building is not fixed in advance of design process. Moreover, even once determined upon, it retains an openness to time. Above all, edges, margins, and border spaces, atypical and organized environments, inspire architectural design to open itself up to all forms of otherness. All of the students are encouraged to adopt the notion, compatible with liminal sites, with our lisière, of mediation, understood in the sense of weaving, combining, exchanging, as a common ground for the research they conduct in their individual projects. Three aspects of the site are of particular interest to us and constitute the standing point for our approach: landscape, space-time, and space-sense. These three angles of approach to the site bring together conceptual tools that may not always be conventional within the discipline of architecture. Every landscape has a temporal dimension, as well as a sensory and a memorial dimension. The landscape is an expression of space-time and space-sense. We work with urban space. The space-time and the space-sense of the city have been expressed most strongly by cinema. From its beginnings, cinema has been intimately linked to the image of the city. The Lumière brothers' sequence shots are urban. The notation of movement is naturally associated with the urban environment. The city is cinema's subject and its decor. I will not try to address here the very broad problem of the relationship between city, architecture, and cinema. However, I will develop some themes within this framework. These themes are related to my hypothesis that the direct perception inherent in the surveying, the observation, the reading, and the interpretation of the city, doubled by the tool that is the video camera, gives us access to hidden realities, and thus reveals a certain urban unconscious. This extremely ephemeral universe constitutes, paradoxically, a matter of sustainable development, but in the sense of heterogenesis. My work seeks to translate Guattarian ecosophy into ethics aesthetics practiced by architecture. I will come back to these ideas later on. For now, let us dwell on the role of movement, the need for its apprehension, and its instrumentalization for thinking and design architecture. To consider this problem, we return to the writings of Walter Benjamin. These writings of the 1920s and 1930s capture perfectly the subjectivity woven into the space-city eye-camera relationship, a subjectivity generated by the context of the early 20th century, but which is closely related to our own contemporary subjectivity. Walking through the streets is the most common way to get to know a city. The figure of the flaneur, drawn by Walter Benjamin in his reading of Baudelaire, catalyzes a constellation of ideas and becomes a space for intellectual experimentation. The crowd and the anonymity that it provides, the multitude of goods, the reflections of the shop windows, noise and speed, are the engine of the new experience of space forged and provided by the 19th century metropolis. In this world, embodied by the Parisian passage, Benjamin finds the expression of economy and culture. He also designates by this term his own method of analysis. What is, for me, most significant in these writings today is that they demonstrate that material knowledge is inseparable from perceptual and existential experience, for it is in this totality only that, for Benjamin, modernity takes place. The urban perception of flaneur is above all fragmentary. It is a space not contemplated but seen, lived in motion. It unfolds in a multitude of configurations, becoming diversity in itself. Perception is immersive, but also selective. In Benjamin's time, cinema became the eye of the modern metropolis. To the perception of the city, both selective and incidental, that is, of the flaneur, the cinema provides an instrument of technical reproduction that becomes a perfect means of updating this visual unconscious. I am using Benjamin's expression. Thus, among other analyses, Benjamin notes in the work of art in the age of its technological reproductibility that the enlargement brings to light entirely new structures of matter, and the slow motion discloses quite unknown aspects within them. Also, cinema for Benjamin corresponds to an incidental perception of space, one that occurs in distraction. Curiously, this perception of space is also that which corresponds in particular to the experience of architecture, still according to Benjamin, I might add. A building is rarely contemplated, but rather perceived through usage, curiously because we, the architects, ignore it, and our tools ignore it. We compose the plan, the facade, etc. The incision into the real is one of the camera instrument's key capabilities. To understand this, Benjamin's famous comparison in the work of art in the age of its technological reproductibility between the healing mage and the surgeon, referred to analogically as the painter and the cameraman, is decisive. The one maintains distance and operates on a whole, whereas the other penetrates and isolates multiple fragments. From an urban perspective, film holds the unprecedented power to penetrate reality. Indeed, fortuitous reality, the roughness of the city, the raw and the quotidian come out forcefully under the pressure of the camera. The camera captures reality in all its fluidity and continuousness. It seizes the perpetual flow of life. Ultimately, film captures and transmits the enchantment of the everyday. The aesthetizing of everyday life, which is normally immersed in routine and devoid of an aura, so manifest in the urban film genre, corresponds with film language more generally. In a film, space and matter speak and show. Film directors exploit this trait of cinematographic language. A particular psychological aspect of cinema seems very significant to me. The camera eye and editing, cut and paste, bring about a new relationship between man and time. The representation of discontinuous space and synchronous time, specific to cinema, tears the urban present from the past that had been conferred on it by a grand unifying narrative. What is particularly revealing for me is that it produces a constant updating of space. This is how a new sense of place identity and self-identity is shaped. The unstable perception of the gaze in motion corresponds with the ephemerality of space and with the fluctuating nature of subjectivity. The disruption of the object and of space by the means of film coincides with a subjectivity that is diffracted within moving matter, observes Suzanne Leandra-Guigues in her study analyzing modern subjectivity, Moderne flânerie du cinéma. But the world perceived in fragments also has another dimension. For modern thinkers and cinema critics, in particular Siegfried Kracauer in his theory of film, distraction was only justified as the reflection of a disorder that one could not control. Today, more than ever, we need tools that will help us comprehend multitude and learn to work in uncertainty. Contemporary territories force us to look at the city with a gaze that defies any kind of totalizing and synthetic vision. Their projection calls for movement, for the multiplications of points of view, for the breaking of orders of hierarchy, and for the unexpected. It invites the invention of tools of design and representation that are multidisciplinary and hold together time and space, the intentional and the accidental, the constructed and the societal. The site, scrutinized by the video, is always an assemblage made up of the layers of its material substance, of the space and of what happens there, of the time of day and the weather, atmospheres and events, occupations and surrenders. In turn, video, once edited, is an assemblage of all these various elements and aspects of the place and of the forms of expression given to them by video. Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari's concept of agencement, advanced in 1,000 Plateaus, operates along two axes. The first concerns the oppositions and connections of things and bodies in space, and their expressions, that is, things and the forms given to them by language and representations. The second concerns appropriations and expropriations, territorializations and deterritorializations, which operate on the terrain of the physical and of identity. Through this system runs a continuous flow of interactions and desires. When transposed to the questions surrounding the site and its design, the concept of agencement calls for work that is multi-scale, spatially and temporally, not hierarchical but rhizomic. The microscale crosses the macroscale. Their notations and expressions call for various figurations, video, cartographies, diagrams. The skills of design, architecture, cinema, and geography come into play. Our approach draws on multiple and multidisciplinary knowledge and savoir-faire. We also seek to capture difference in space. Unlike repetition, difference is more difficult to express with conventional architectural tools. Video is the quintessential language of the multitude in space. It allows the sensations, signs, and meanings of space to interact. This conceptual dimension is perfectly captured by Deleuze and Guattari's notion of smooth and striated in 1,000 Plateaux. These notions are based on several characteristics, of which two seem essential to our discussion. From the point of view and in the language of geometry, smooth space is directional and has open intervals, whereas striated space is dimensional and has closed intervals. From the point of view and in the language of psychology, smooth space is the space of affect, sensation, emotion, whereas striated space is the space of measurement, intellect. Video is the perfect technique to express smooth space. Affording importance to these notions, our research creation in academic context is critical of the classic urban design approach consisting in formalizing a large urban ensemble before working on the building. Our strategy does the opposite. The design project formalizes only an urban fragment, but embraces multiple conjunctures and also remains open to future transformations. The goal is to overturn the principle that considers urban planning as an a priori of architecture and to make contemporary thought that of architecture, art, the humanities, the sciences, and technology, and the experience of urban space the main principles of city production. At Media Lab AU, we have explored this and created several video sound installations. We have discovered that spatial, sensorial, and behavioral aspects of this type of work are very significant for architectural design. The audiovisual installation offers immersion in the moving image and is structured around a moving gaze. The movement of the body stimulates decentralized perception. Its mental representation is contrary to perspective. The installation stimulates a perception that engages the whole body, vision, hearing, movement. This perception is incidental, never total, always partial. The visitor moves, and each of his or her passages through the space becomes a unique montage of the content of the work. The device of the work accepts its partial perception, does not impose the holistic capture of all of the conceived events, moments, images. There is a non-objectification of the work. Art becomes an activity, not an object belonging to the author. With the students, we seek to think of the architectural project in the same way, to produce this apparatus installation in urban space while also giving it the power to ensure social and environmental performance. The project site must therefore be thought of as an interval in space, as a link and a passage, and not as a new centrality, the project being equipment and space that are public. This strategy makes it possible to amplify the use of a new place, to animate and encourage social exchanges, to make links. The overlapping uses give rise to co-presence and co-acceptance. Such an environment becomes a social condenser. The porosity, friction, and mixture of spaces of various types, in particular of public, collective, and private spaces, allow for the enriching of these spaces by one another without the need for additional material means. The adaptability and indeterminacy of spaces allow users an active interpretation of the place, while openings and continuities support connections, stimulate social exchanges, assume vegetal continuities, rebuild biodiversity. What makes the city is not architecture, but urban space. It is neither the full nor really the void. It is an expanse filled with life, atmospheres, and materials. Working with the camera eye means first of all to give primary operational importance to the concept of space, understood not in geometric sense, but as both common and total. With the camera, the wild force of the landscape pushes to the forefront and imposes itself on the design process. The projected structure draws its own energy from found energy. The camera teaches us that every existing landscape is already public space, and in particular that of urban margins, because the wasteland, this place emblematic of late capitalism, is also a dumping ground for dreams. Urban art confirms this. To scrutinize the arrangement of the common in the symbiosis of landscapes and men, of movements and breaths of life, is to practice low-cost ecological architecture. This kind of architecture is not completely material, not completely dependent on gravitational force. It is an anti-object. It is an apparatus that captures and activates the forces that are already there, organizes the self-propulsion of these forces in a passive way, a renewable spatial and social apparatus. We must approach banality by détournement, by transferring it to the aesthetics. This must happen within a design capable of practicing ethics and aesthetics. Ethics aesthetics are taught to us by Félix Guattari in the three ecologies. For Guattari, Social and environmental damage in the era of late capitalism prolong and are reflected in gigantic mental degradations. We must then bring together environmental and social ecologies with an ecology that will be mental. I quote, "It should be understood that the three ecologies originate from a common ethico-aesthetic discipline and are also distinct from a point of view of practices that characterize them. Their different styles are produced by what I call heterogenesis, in other words, process of continuous resingularization. Individuals must become both more united and increasingly different. The same is true for the resingularization of schools, town councils, urban planning, etc.